So my presentation is a DNA journey of the true biblical Hebrews, how the Y-DNA tells us the identity of the ancient Hebrews. So I have to start out with some science facts. So what is DNA? So DNA is short for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it is the chemical that contains your genetic code and holds your genetic information that parents pass to their biological children. It is used to identify ancestry and to trace origins. DNA is the common link between personal and communal identity, and DNA identifies haplogroups. So haplogroups place people in groupings who share a genetic link through a common ancestor at some point in history. Again, haplogroups, there are two of those. One is the Y chromosome or the Y-DNA, and the mitochondrial DNA or mtDNA. Y-DNA is passed only through the patrilineal line from father to son, and mtDNA is passed down the matrilineal line from mother to offsprings of both sexes. A haplogroup can reveal a person's nation of origin and ancestral clan. It can be associated with specific migration histories, and it can reveal your ancestors. Haplogroups are individuals who share a same haplotype. So when they're joined together, these individuals form a larger haplogroup. So the importance of the Y-DNA. Y-DNA of a son is nearly identical to his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, and so on through generations, with only minor mutations over time. A Y-DNA line can be traced back hundreds or even thousands of years, and all male descendants of a paternal line share the same Y-DNA, regardless of how long ago they lived. So this is significant for Israel because the passing of the Y-DNA from the father to son is the same as bloodlines mentioned in the Bible. So kinship is determined by the father-son relationship. Hebrew or Semitic culture follows a patrilineal custom. Y-DNA is the basis of the passing on of the family name, inheritance, property, land, etc. Also, science is now catching up with the way Yah established family lines. Examples of Hebrew bloodline establishment would be Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Esau and Jacob, and so on. Genealogy was explained in several places in the Bible to prove lineage, or what we would call today proving your DNA. Even the lineage of Yahusha was explained to prove his legitimacy as the Mashiach, and we find that in Luke chapter 3, verses 23 through 38. So the journey of Israel. Analyzing the identity and history of a people takes more than DNA evidence. There are other factors to consider in determining this identity, history, and culture of Jacob and his 12 sons. So in this analysis, we must consider the following. So the oral tradition or the history, biblical evidence, and that is your oral tradition, and history and migration patterns must match biblically, and genetic markers. Genetics should match biblically and historically. And just to throw this in about the oral tradition, I do know several people from Ghana who tell me that their grandparents and great-grandparents told them often as children that, you know, we migrated from Israel. We are Israelites. That is your history, that's your culture. So that kind of lines up there. So these factors support two ideas. There were large groups of people who migrated from North America to Ethiopia, to Sub-Saharan Africa, to Central Africa, to West Africa, back to Central Africa, and finally down to Southern Africa. And the DNA of those people and their descendants who are spread across the earth all have the same haplogroup of E1B1A. So this haplogroup is also known as EM2 and E3A. It has gone through several name changes, and maybe that was done to confuse people, but it is now known as E1B1A. It is found in some tribes in Africa and throughout the diaspora, and the descendants of Hebrews who were taken into captivity through the transatlantic slave trade. Although this haplogroup is found on the continent of Africa, it doesn't mean it is native to the continent. There are many ethnic groups living on the African continent today that are not genetically tied to the land. Our ancestors were immigrants and are now considered African because of nationality, not because of ethnicity or natural origin. And on the screen, I just have a map of some of the language groups of the Niger-Congo and the Bantu language families. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. So are we Shemitic? We're Shemitic, not Hamitic. So Dr. Yehoshua Ben Ephraim, he's a researcher of E1B1A DNA and genetics, states that with logical sequencing and logical conclusion, we are able to understand what the Bible explains about ancestry of the nation of Israel. So, and quote, the slaves on the ships whose DNA is E1B1A are the lost sheep of Israel, obviously and clearly are the seeds of Jacob. As such, if their DNA is E1B1A, then obviously and logically, Jacob's DNA had to be E1B1A as well. You can't have one without the other. It's common sense and not hard to tie it all together. The Most High created his people, and this is why no other race or nation of people on the planet possess E1B1 DNA. So if you look at the chart, E1 belongs to Abraham, E1B belongs to Isaac, and E1B1A belongs to Jacob and the nation of Israel. And just to note, E1B1B is the Hamitic haplogroup, and that belongs to Ethiopians, Egyptians, Libyans, and Africans, but not Hebrews on the African continent. The descendants of Esau fall into this category, and this haplogroup has also been found in Europe. So E1B1 DNA from Israel to Africa. The E1B1A genetic marker is especially common among Niger-Congo and Bantu language speakers and was spread throughout Africa during numerous migrations from North Africa or Israel and Ethiopia. These migrants were the Shemitic people, descendants of the ancient Israelites. Niger-Congo language speakers can be found today in West Africa in the area once known as Negro Land. Bantu language speakers are found in Central and Southern Africa. These groups are related and are in the same language family, but were separated through the Bantu expansion when the Bantu speakers migrated east. And the map on the left shows the E1B1A haplogroup. It is in brown, and that is West Africa, Central and Southern Africa. And the map on the right shows where the Bantu language speakers are today and where the Niger-Congo language speakers are on the West African coast. So Hebrew migrations from Israel. Zephaniah 3:10-11, Ezekiel 22:15, Leviticus 26:33, and Deuteronomy 28:64 are just a few of the scriptures that can be used to explain that the 12 tribes of ancient Israelites were scattered into various places in Africa through conquest and invasion of various empires. So Zephaniah 3:10 says, from beyond the rivers of Cush, my worshipers, my scattered people will bring me offerings. So where is the land beyond the rivers of Cush or Ethiopia that Zephaniah 3 talks about? Modern day Ethiopia is not the same as ancient Ethiopia. Ethiopia in ancient times was much larger than the country that we know today. It was also a large part of Africa. So the land beyond the ancient borders of Ethiopia is Central, West, and Southern Africa. This is where the Hebrews ended up after fleeing Israel. We were scattered even farther to the west during the transatlantic slave trade. And just the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. The map on the left shows the area of Negro land, and the one on the right shows where the Bantu language speakers are. So Africa to the diaspora. Deuteronomy 28 foretells of the punishment that will come to those who did not obey Yah. He said he said several times that we would be scattered into many places and eventually to the four corners of the earth. So the descendants of Jacob arrived on the continent of Africa after multiple migrations. They also survived the transatlantic slave trade and the dispersion of the Israelites throughout the diaspora. The E1B1A DNA of ancient ancestors remains today in their children and can be found in many places and in several people groups on the African continent. Through DNA testing, many African Americans, Afro-Latinos, Afro-Brazilians, and Black people in the Caribbean have discovered that this genetic code is present in them also. Even in the diaspora and throughout much turmoil, our DNA has not been destroyed or altered. We are connected to the people on the continent who are also connected to the people who left Israel. So this is just a snapshot, a brief snapshot of the Niger-Congo Bantu people today. So we have some in Rwanda, Congo, Jamaica, Colombia, Brazil, the USA, Mexico, Mozambique, Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa. And there are many, many more places. Shemites or converts, fake Jews versus real Jews. So who's lying? DNA evidence proves that those in the land of Israel are European Jews and are the descendants of Khazars, a Turkic group of the North Caucasus Mountains who converted to Judaism in the late 8th and 9th century. In fact, Ashkenazi Jews don't use Y DNA to determine ancestry. They use maternal DNA, and this is directly opposite of how Yah established bloodlines in the Torah. The paternal haplogroup J1 and J2 has been widely recognized as Abraham's lineage, but this is not the truth. The J haplogroup has no Shemitic ties at all. E1B1B has also been linked to the Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews. Again, no Shemitic ties. R haplotype and E1B1B haplotype have no bloodline or genetic ties to the ancient Hebrews. Not only do we fit the profile of the people of the book, but DNA evidence shows that those with E1B1A and other haplogroup DNA types are not true biblical Hebrews. So the awakening and the return. We must present all possible evidence to prove identity and assist other Hebrews in the awakening. Biblical evidence, similarities of African and Hebrew language, African and Hebrew cultural similarities, slave ship journals, and African oral histories are just a few. Scientific genetic proof, or DNA, is also one of the ways to prove that the ancient Hebrews that migrated from ancient Israel to the numerous locations we find ourselves today are biblical Hebrews. So now that we know who we are, let's return or teshuvah to Yah and the Torah. Thank you.